So, in our keynote session, Enabling Circular Economy, where you are right now, we dive straight into the real-world challenges and opportunities of implementing circular economy principles. And our next guest has spent the last decade at the MacArthur Foundation, leading the world's largest circular economy business network. And he believes that to make circularity a reality, businesses need a mindset shift, to think bigger and to embrace complexity rather than shy away from it. In our fireside chat, we will discuss where we are today, which industries are leading the way and what is needed to accelerate progress. And we will also explore disruptive innovations and practical steps companies can take to get started. Okay, so please welcome with me the MacArthur Foundation's Executive Lead Business Network, Joe Murphy. You take the blue one, I'll take here the yellow one. Yes. So make yourself comfortable in our fireside chat. We're imagining that we have a fireside chat in the background.
Yeah, it's nice and warm.
Joe, let's talk about you first.
Yeah.
So you started out in finance. That's the world of numbers and spreadsheets. What was the turning point that led you to focus on the circular economy, and why is it so personally important to you?
Yes, actually, I am a trained accountant. It's a bit. I'm an undercover accountant now. I spent a long time trying to not be an accountant after training. I do appreciate and like accountancy, but it just wasn't for me. I think really actually the realization actually came after that. So after I'd worked in finance for a few years, I found it a little bit purposeless. You know, there was some great innovation, really complex stuff, but fundamentally, what was it all adding up to? So I left and I worked in a charity sector for a year or two, and actually that was equally problematic for me because you were constantly coming up against systemic issues that are really hard to address. You're often just treating the symptoms of a problem rather than addressing root causes. So it was, having spent some time in the private sector, some time in the charity sector, I was really looking for something that was actually trying to work in the middle to really address root causes and think about how we can stop the negative impacts of how we currently do business in the first place. And that led me ultimately to the circular economy. So this tackling root causes was a key element. And the other was that it had a positive business case. It was built on an economic thesis, first and foremost. And I think that's really important as the terminology has been more widely adopted, that we don't lose that core central argument. And it's pretty simple, the economic kind of thesis really. And it's based on the fact that the way we do business today, the linear economy, is hugely wasteful. So we just have literal waste of materials, right, to an extensive degree. And there's economic value in those materials. Secondly, we have chronic underutilization of our stuff. So that goes from everything, from the clothes that we wear, and a pair of jeans being worn on average 10 times, right? All the way through to structural waste. So thinking about the ownership of cars and that model and the fact that cars are parked 90% of the time. So that chronic underutilization is a massive economic opportunity. And the final thing is that we don't value the ecosystem services provided by nature. And pollinators is a great example of that, where in the US or in certain areas, we're now having to drive vans with bees on the back around to bring the pollinators to the fields, where in the past, that was being provided by nature for free. Now it has an economic cost to a business, to a farm. Right. So I was really compelled with the circular economy because it was a systems change idea addressing root causes, and it was fundamentally an economic thesis, which, by the way, had the benefits of addressing waste and pollution and regenerating nature as a consequence, but it didn't lead with that.
Well, that sounds like a really good motivation, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So, to understand a little bit better, what is your daily business? What are you handling with every day?
Well, so at the foundation, we have always worked very closely with business since the very beginning because of that economic thesis and the need for us to have credibility behind it. So from our first reports, we partnered with McKinsey, and having McKinsey and the foundation, McKinsey-backed analysis made a big difference. Those reports were released at the World Economic Forum, again, just really playing into mainstream business conversations. Today we have a global business network. Many of the companies that have spoken this morning, Henkel, BASF, are part of that network. And that has over 200 organizations. The large majority are big multinationals. And the foundation's, strategy for impact is to try and work with the most influential players in a value chain and drive impact through the value chain, leveraging their influence. And so that's core to how we work in everything we do. And there's many examples of that we could go into.
Yeah. So if we stock off where we are today, so how far have we come in making the circular economy a reality globally? So where do you see the biggest gaps that still need to be filled?
Yeah, so I think it's a mixed story. So on the one hand, we've had incredible adoption. So actually we first launched the circular economy and coined that term in 2012. So it's 13 years ago. Obviously, there were pre-existing ideas, cradle to cradle, performance economy. It wasn't all new stuff, but actually putting the terminology circular economy, putting a systems view around all these ideas and presenting it as an economic thesis, that only happened in 2012. Today, we have massive adoption. Of that term. So 75 countries around the world have circular economy roadmaps. I mean, that is incredible uptake. 55% of businesses have some form of circular economy strategy, commitment, targets. So we've seen this massive uptake of the idea. And where we are now is really in the implementation phase. And actually, we are seeing some great progress. And I think that your slides from the BASF example will really summarize the different phases to this really well. Most of the progress we're seeing, I would describe as niche market. So it's still a meaningful scale, but we're typically solving for certain categories in certain markets. And the next step is moving to mass market solutions. And that requires a whole level of investment in infrastructure, technology, policy that can enable that. So that we're in the implementation phase. We're somewhere between niche market and mass market, probably more towards niche market solutions. And fundamentally, if you step back from it all, material extraction is increasing year on year. The line is going like that. It has done since the 1970s. So that just goes to that point that despite this brilliant wave of adoption, some brilliant niche market solutions, we haven't yet seen the needle move on the extraction of raw materials.
Yeah, this reminds me of the innovation circle. You have the early adopters, then you get into the mass market and so on. So it really reminds me of that. Yeah, exactly. Just as you said. So some industries are really pushing forward with circular solutions, also with the adoption. So while others seem to be lagging behind. So who are the leaders from your point of view as a network, and which sectors need to accelerate their efforts?
So we see leaders across sectors, I would say. So, and I think that has much more to do with the culture and the mindset of the business. So I think businesses that have really deeply internalized this as a long-term strategic advantage, an actual necessity, either from a kind of new market opportunity, increasing competitiveness, or from a risk management perspective, have really said that one way or another, this is going to play out, and we need to position ourselves into this. So across sectors, we have many examples. And companies like Philips that were flagged up earlier today, I think are a great example, because they are objectively driving revenue. And I think that's a really important signal to send around the adoption of circular economy, that this is a revenue-generating, value-creating strategy for the business. In terms of sectors, the reality is, as I said, we don't have the sufficient system conditions in place across sectors to really see the level of adoption that we've seen, for example, with the energy transition, and it is remarkable now the scale of solutions, and someone mentioned the mix of renewable energy within the EU. We don't have the system conditions in place, but on plastics, particularly with the UN treaty, we're probably the closest to having alignment of policy, business innovation, collaboration, unified metrics, goal clarity, and actually the investment in place.
Yeah. Thank you. So let's dive a little bit more into the MacArthur Foundation, because it isn't just about raising awareness. You're actively driving systematic change. So what does this look like in practice?
So we spend a lot of time focusing on goal clarity. So how are we ever going to make the investments and decisions needed to actually transform whole industries without a unified understanding of where we're trying to get to? So we do that with individual companies in terms of supporting their strategy development, but more importantly, we do that with cross-industry groups. So we typically pick sector focus, so we have a lot of work around plastics packaging, we have work around the fashion sector, we have work around food and changing the food system, and we are doing some discovery work around the automotive sector, particularly around electrification and batteries. So we'd be very keen to talk to any businesses. I'm sure there are many in the room.
Well, actually, we have BMW here as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's great. Great case study with BMW and Salzgitter last night, and it goes a little bit to the symbiosis point. But so we work across those sectors. We focus a lot on goal clarity, and what we try to do is align an industry group behind a vision of where we're trying to get to. So that unified alignment that this is the end goal, and then the critical path to how we get there. So what are the policies that need to be in place? What are the infrastructure? What are the design changes that need to happen? How do we address problematic design and products that are coming onto market at an industry level? And fundamentally, we operate in a pre-competitive space. So our goal is to try and form industry voices that can advocate for the common rules that then business are comfortable to compete on top. But without those common rules and without that common infrastructure, we are not going to enable that level of competition that will ultimately drive acceleration to circular economy.
One more question about how to work strongly together in the future. So what are the key levers that need to be pulled to really make circularity the norm?
Yeah, so as I said, I think there's been a lot of conversations about ESG, and we're sort of peak ESG, and we're sort of burst the ESG bubble. And I think I would agree with that personally. I think that it depends how you characterize the ESG. Some people use it as a different way of saying sustainability and meaning everything in that field. My interpretation of it is more that this strategy to drive impact, which is built on the idea that you get companies to commit to voluntary commitments. It's largely brand-led, and it's driven by reporting and disclosure that will then unlock investment. I think that is not working sufficiently. There are some great examples, and the work that I think we've done around plastics with the global commitment, and Henkel are closely involved in that, has been a voluntary commitment that's been really geared at driving policy change. Yeah. Because voluntary commitment on its own just can't get us so far. So a lot of our work and a lot of the kind of next era, I would say, is about very specific advocacy work, very focused collaboration around what are the interventions, the solutions, the changes in specific markets that can unlock that next level of mass market implementation. So it's different, I would say, from what maybe has been in the past of companies trying to have logos on many logo blocks and trying to understand these topics and be seen to be positioning to do the right thing, and much more focused, targeted investments. Yeah.
Let's talk more about examples. So you work closely with companies that are really serious about circularity. Can you give us 2 or 3 outstanding examples of companies that are really leading the way, and maybe you have also one example in Germany.
Yeah, I've got a few German examples. I think my bias is always more towards companies that are working on the demand side, as I said, with Philips, and companies that are really showing the kind of business income benefit of these strategies and not looking at it more from a sort of zero waste side, or how, as to the last speaker's point around really looking at the business model and not necessarily just looking at material substitution. So I would say Philips are a great example on what they've done in terms of their moving to a service model for a lot of their heavy-duty medical equipment, MRI scanners, CT scanners. Often that's just a better proposition for the hospital groups they're selling into, because they sell on a pay-per-scan basis instead of having to own the asset as a hospital group. Obviously impacts the cash flow and it impacts the balance sheet, but it can be a more compelling proposition. Decathlon are doing some great, more on a consumer facing, so in terms of actual driving consumer demand around rental. So they've grown a 20 million, this was last year, 20 million euro business off rental of products. They're looking at specific product categories, specific markets, but they've seen quite significant year-on-year growth. So I think it went from 12 million in 2023 to 20 million in 2024. In Germany, I think, as I said, what BASF are doing in terms of I guess, kind of diversifying feedstocks. And really, if we talk about scale up of implementation and we talk about changing the trajectory of that extraction curve, it's only with companies of BASF scale adopting this we're actually going to make a noticeable impact on that. So I think the work that's happening there is great. SAP is another company. We talk a lot about digital.
It's also here.
Also here. Hi. But SAP are doing a lot of work, really. Typically, what you will see for non-financial data in companies, this might ring true for some people in the room, is that's often, people, when we go into a company, they'll often have a spreadsheet that will contain certain...
That's your old world.
That's my old world, spreadsheets, yeah, which are great, but they have limitations. But a spreadsheet that's been created to comply with a specific policy in a specific market at a specific time. So a lot of the non-financial data is very fragmented, actually. And then the cost to the business of trying to aggregate that in a way that helps them have the sort of full value chain visibility is not insignificant because of the way that it's been sort of patchwork case by case. And again, I think that goes back to that mindset that if you see this as a cost, if we see this as something we have to do to comply with X, to meet our commitments here, you're always going to be trying to minimize that cost fundamentally. If it's viewed as a strategic asset, as in we need this information to be able to unlock and make strategic decisions in the future, then it's an investment, it's not a cost. And so SAP have some solutions around that, and they're doing some great work, I think, to help companies realize they're sitting on the data, actually.
Yeah.
And it's not as expensive and complex as perhaps everyone is fearing. So yeah, a few examples.
And I'm sure you have many more examples,
Many
but
more.
if you're interested to get to know them, just ask Joe. He's here. So, Joe, you've built the world's largest business network for the circular economy. And how can companies like the companies here become part of it? Tell us.
Yeah, I mean, so we typically try and work with the largest and most influential businesses in different sectors. I think what we really look for is that long-term strategic commitment and alignment, and if we have that in place, we'd be, delighted to have conversations. So if companies in this room really are taking a long-term view on circular economy and see this as a strategic advantage, I'd love to hear from you. As I said, we're particularly doing some discovery work at the moment around the automotive sector, and I think an earlier speaker talked about the materials dimension of the energy transition. So not just from storage and batteries and all of the materials we need for that, but also from a generation in terms of solar and wind. At the moment, the supply chains for those products are linear supply chains. And we're reaching the end of the first generation of really at-scale wind, at-scale solar, at-scale batteries. And there are no onward pathways, fundamentally, for those. And when you think about the current context in terms of resource security, material security, energy security, actually, there's a very strong and compelling economic argument to be investing in local supply chains that can keep certain materials within borders. Yeah. And there's an economic opportunity and a job creation opportunity as well.
Yeah, yeah. And the other way around, what is the advantage for companies to be part of your network?
Well, I think, this hunt and pack.
It's a surprising question, I know, I want to know.
But it's true. I mean, it's like, we have to be, as the last speaker said, I love that idea of our evolutionary advantage came from hunting in packs. We now need to figure out how to do that in a different context. But of course, collaboration is key. But I don't want to say that in a bit of a naff way, because obviously we talk a lot about collaboration, and there's frankly lots of sort of generic average collaboration that is not helping us really move forward. I think it's really important because it is hard. Companies need to be comfortable. They need to go on an internal engagement process to be comfortable to engage and share a level of information that could be perceived as competitive information. But really what we need to do is take that collaboration to a next level and say, how are we focusing on driving specific solutions in specific markets over the next 3 to 5 years? So speaking of the next 3 to 5 years, what are the most exciting breakthroughs for you? Well, yeah, I think the plastics treaty is a biggie, in terms of setting rules globally, and I think that is that level of ambition of global rules from a legislation perspective, again, that we need to be pursuing across industries. So how can we be thinking about advocacy work that can be driving that level of ambition, that level of outcome? How do we speed up that process? And the UN treaty has not been finalized. We're moving to a next stage of that, but it has been negotiated on the fastest time frame of any international process like that. So I do think that level of speed and ambition is key.
Wonderful. So do you have one key piece of advice? So many companies want to embrace circularity but don't know where to start or where to move on. What would it be?
Yeah, I think so. I have a colleague, he's also called Joe at the foundation, and he sort of uses this term circular-ish. So it's like a bit circular, maybe not all the way. And I think it's quite important that, because when you step back and you look at the whole concept, it's this beautiful system, right? It all works, and it's very purist in its kind of interpretation, and we need to maintain that level of that's what we're aiming for fundamentally. And every time you actually try and implement something, you're reducing that purist concept to a certain problem we're trying to solve here. So I think it's really important that we're able to hold that big macro puritanical idea of what we're trying to deliver ultimately as the end goal, but we're also able to be quite pragmatic and zoom in and say, well, this is a circular-ish solution now that we can make over the next 12 months. What can we do on Monday to actually start implementing this huge...
To break it down. Yeah.
But if you just do the incremental without proper strategic belief in the long term, then what are we doing?
Thank you, Joe, for this deep dive. Applause for Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, we are again just back in the right time now.